Hello, welcome to the latest edition of the PinkUn Norwich City Podcast, where we promise we're not going to wallow too much in a 5-0 defeat at Manchester City on this grey Sunday morning, which is rather reflective of the mood of a difficult start to the season for Norwich City, but we probably all knew it was going to be difficult, didn't we? It's Dave Freezer here, alongside Paddy Davitt and Connor Southwell, coming to you on the PinkUn YouTube channel, as well as the PinkUn Podcast audio feed. Boys, how are we doing? Connor first. You're drying off, aren't you? Just got caught in a rather heavy rain shower.
Yeah, pathetic fallacy, I think. I made sure to go out for a run this morning, I think, after being sort of cooped up in a car for, 9.5 hours, as it turned out to be yesterday. It's good to get out and sort of move. And, got caught in the very heavy rainstorm that is outside about halfway around. So came in with looking absolutely drenched, to be honest. So I had to dry off before we started recording this. So if anyone sees any sort of drips of water coming off, then that's the reason. I'm not just sort of profusely sweating or anything like that. So yeah, not a great start to a Sunday. It's kind of followed the theme that we had yesterday, I think. So I'm hoping that the day improves from here, to be honest.
And Pad, we had a bit of fun on the way home, didn't we? It was like, can this day get any worse? We got up to the ground a bit later than we'd have liked as well because of congestion. And then the petrol tank's nearly on empty. We find a petrol station. They haven't got any petrol.
Well, yeah, no unleaded. And then what happened? Got in the car, went a bit further down the road. I won't name where we were, but it was proper hillbilly land. And they don't take card payments. We're in 2021, aren't we? So luckily we had some old school cash. But as I jokingly said to Tony, our video guru, you could see this day ending with us having to push the car home, which would have put a tin hat on it. But thankfully we were spared that fate. We trooped very wearily back into the fine city about midnight. So, as I've said to my wife this morning, anybody tells you what we do is glamorous, covering the Premier League and Man City away, no. So, whether we have a receptive audience for that sentiment or not, probably not, because I'm sure lots of it would swap places with us. But no, yeah, it was an entirely forgettable day for a lot of reasons. But we as Norwich and Daniel and the players, they get another chance to go again, don't they, on Tuesday night? So we'll put a full stop on this weekend in the next hour or so, and then let's look forward, because certainly things do need to change a little bit. I think it's safe to say, in terms of the good ship Norwich.
Yeah, cash, eh? I think I've had a tenner in my wallet since March, something like that. Just don't use it anymore. I mean, person, because Carrow Road is a contactless stadium now, isn't it? They don't take cash for anything at the stadium and at their shops and things like that. But anyway, yes, this is the podcast. We come to you, as always, in association with Future Radio 107.8 FM, and we're going to review the game. We're going to split the pod in two this week. We'll do part one. We're going to have a quick review of that game because we don't want to dwell on it too much. And then part two, we're going to really get this moving forward. Talk about the Bournemouth game. Talk about how Norwich do hit reset and shake off this worrying start to the season. There's a good little stat in the Sun this morning. It is the first time that Norwich have lost both games in the top flight since the 87-88 season. They lost 1-0 at Everton and 1-0 at home to Southampton that year. They were coming off having finished 5th the season before, and they ultimately finished 14th. So that's worth a little reminder, isn't it? That just because you have a bad start to the season, it doesn't mean that you're going to have a bad season. And of course, they have probably never had as tough a start to a season as Liverpool and Manchester City, who are just operating in a different stratosphere. Football is a very different game to how it was 35 years ago or whatever, wasn't it? But I did have a quick look back as well. Last time that they didn't score a goal in the first two matches was 2008 under Glenn Roeder. They lost 2-0 at Coventry, Pad, your boys, and then they lost 1-0 to MK Dons away as well in the League Cup. So it's been a little while since we've not seen a goal such early doors. But Pad, yeah, if I bounce it back to you, 5-0, we all knew it was going to be a difficult game, but I just think the biggest alarm bell really for people, the biggest concern is that Norwich haven't been able to show a bit of backbone, a bit of resilience, and they haven't really shown any hint of being able to shut up shop and stop a team from just overrunning them. You know, they were outclassed by £1 billion worth of talent and literally some of the best, certainly, players in the country and in Europe, but they just didn't show any resistance really, did they?
Not in the final analysis, Dave, no. And and just to backtrack slightly, that £1 billion worth of talent excluded Kevin De Bruyne, Phil Foden, and Raheem Sterling starts on the bench with Riyad Mahrez. It's Football Manager, it's fantasy football, but it's a reality if you follow the Sky Blues in that part of the world, and that's what Norwich are up against. Not to that most marked of degrees every week in the Premier League, but pretty much every other opponent as a far richer resource to draw on. That's factual. We all know that. Every fan, if a Norwich persuasion going into yesterday's game, would have accepted that. But as you rightly say, it's thereafter Norwich are far too compliant, and 7 minutes they're 1 down, 22 minutes they're 2 down. That came after another goal, inverted commas, have been chalked off for a VAR pitchside monitor review overturned. So if it had been, I said to you this before we started recording, if it's Jack Grealish doing a Maradona and going past 7 players and putting Tim Krul on his backside, and it's a goal befitting £100 million player, then you're holding your hands up. Or goals plural. Then you just say, too good. This is the Premier League. This is the elite. This is world class football at its best. But it's not that, is it? Ultimately, you break the goals down, and we'll get into it in more depth. It's balls inside left backs. It's centre backs not able to cut crosses out. It's lack of concentration. And all of those elements for me are within the gift of Daniel Farke and his coaches and those players to control. It's not, as I say, being put to the sword by hold your hands up type football. It's basic errors really, and a lot of them. And we saw it again against Liverpool second half after a pretty robust first 45 on the opening night, allied to the atmosphere and the home fans made it that way. But still, the vulnerability was evident in that second half spell, and just continued where they left off for me against Man City. And of course, if you've got that level of talent, they will give it any invitation, and Norwich were gift wrapping a lot of these invitations. They're going to punish you. So yes, we understand the unevenness of the level playing field, but I think what probably is irking lots of Norwich fans already at this stage, even though it is Liverpool and Manchester City, is there's elements that Norwich can control that they simply aren't. And Daniel was as frustrated as any. You go back onto the Pink and read his comments. He didn't try and hide or protect his players. He, particularly with Yanulis, who he hooked at half-time and brought Bali Mumba on. He was very strident in what that guy was detailed to do and didn't do. And as a result, Norwich, you essentially go to Man City and you give them a 2-goal head start. Forget it. It's not going to happen. So that really game was done and dusted in that first quarter of the game, essentially. And until they start to learn and understand that you can't knock off, you can't let a man run off the back of you, you can't give players of the quality of Jesus the time and space to bring balls down on their chest and put balls across your box. You can't, if you're Grant Hanley, be defending 2 yards behind the rest of your defenders for the Raheem Sterling finish. You can't, if you're Ben Gibson, break out of the defensive line, trying to press into midfield and leave a gap which Riyad Mahrez then cuts across, perfectly timed run onto Diaz's pass to finish it for the 5th goal. These are fundamental errors that need to be eradicated quickly, because if they're not, it's all right saying, well, we've got past Liverpool and Man City now, the season can start. But if they go into this weekend, we'll go past Bournemouth. If they go into Leicester at Carrow Road this Saturday with the same mindset, individually and collectively, Leicester have good enough players to punish them. And we'll be talking again this time next week about, weren't Leicester good, but didn't Norwich give them a helping hand? And it needs to stop, and stop quickly.
It does. I mean, that Gibson goal in particular, I actually think it's almost quite funny in the end when you look back in the replay. I was looking at it in the car when we started driving back, wasn't I? And if you were sort of a Gary Neville or a Jamie Carragher, you had one of the fancy screens where you can draw on it. You can literally draw a big circle around Mahrez, because Mumba tried to play offside. Gibson was trying to read the play and read it wrong, didn't he? He thought Diaz was going to fire a short pass into, I think it was Sterling in front of him. And literally you've got Mahrez, who's what, £75 million player or something, isn't it? Just in acres of space to pick his spot, and then he curls it in off the post. It did remind me of, sadly, the final day of 2019-20 when I was there, and it was that horrible Project Restart period. That was the 10th consecutive defeat for Norwich. It wasn't already relegated. The players just desperate for it to be over. And Kevin De Bruyne curls in a lovely shot late in that game to make it 5, just to really rub salt in the wounds. But also, when we were in the car driving back, Connor, of course, we heard Gabby Agbonlahor, who sort of, he said a few uninformed things about Norwich as well, but the pertinent thing I thought was him talking about how if there was one game that a club like Man City wants for their first home game of the season, it's Norwich. Just basically saying it's an easy game. And yes, of course, the players, as they know and have already admitted, Lise Malou and Hanley in the interviews after the game, they've got to do a lot better. They didn't do enough things right. But I don't think Farke can escape this with criticism either. He matched them up 4-3-3. There wasn't a defensive setup. There wasn't weren't any sort of spiky, resilient comments really about how Norwich are going to go there and really try and thwart them. It just felt like they tried to play Man City at their own game too much for me. And that's the big thing I'm really feeling this morning on the back of, a painful performance that we didn't enjoy witnessing, is that Norwich are just being too nice and teams aren't worried about facing them.
Yeah, I think he gave the boxing analogy on Friday, didn't he? About how when you play Manchester City, you've got to have a punch. I mean, if that was a boxing clash, you'd have thrown the towel in after probably 20 minutes. It was relentless. It was wave after wave of attack, and Norwich just were so passive and lacked real quality in their defensive work. When you think about teams that are really resilient and really successful at this level at being quite, as in Jurgen Klopp's terms, annoying, and we can put Burnley into that category, we can put others in that category. They're really good at their distances, and when you play the top teams, that compactness in your defensive shape is so important, because you can't let them play through the lines. You can't, as Norwich did, essentially concede the same goal 4 times, which was a left back being pulled far too away from positionally was way out from their left-sided centre-back, leave that big space so Jesus could go out to come back in again. A pass could be played between the two, and then there was a cross and someone would tap it in, and that was essentially the goal that we saw 4 times. I think you've almost got to imagine it like the back 4 all holding on to the same bit of rope, and you have to work in a tandem to prevent those spaces from appearing, because if Jesus gets the ball out wide, that's kind of where you want him. And then the next stage of that is to stop him getting to the byline to put in a low cross. So it was just it just wasn't good enough defensively. It lacked discipline. They were passive. For as much as Daniel said, they worked on that in the week. So clearly there had been not on the evidence of what we saw yesterday, clearly not enough. There are also elements, for example, there was a goal kick routine where Krul would play out to Gilmore, and then they'd try and look to play through the middle that way. And Man City thwarted that after about 2 minutes, and yet we saw it all afternoon. And it's that sort of inability to adapt to situations like that will cost Norwich. And it's worth adding that we don't have the context of probably 10 games where Norwich have played teams that maybe they'd be expected to beat to put this into probably a bit more context, but we've only got the evidence that we've got, which is these 2 games and a very difficult project restart period recently, to kind of judge it in. And Paddy's right, if these themes continue, and it's not something that you just click your fingers or sign a left back and a defensive midfielder and that solves all the issues. It's a structural issue that Norwich City have defensively, that they need to be coached out of, and that is the bit that's going to take time, I think. So it's almost the basics that were really concerning, and like you say there, it's just a lack of resilience, a lack of defensive quality, which if that persists all season, they're going to be too easy to play against. They're going to concede lots of goals, and they're going to do that whilst not having a punch in attack, which they didn't have yesterday. I think you highlighted something this morning that said 4 touches in the opposition penalty area, and that really came from Rashica's chance late on, where it kind of felt like Man City almost toyed them into that position. So yeah, it was a really disappointing afternoon. As Pad said, there are ways to lose football matches. Last week, we've spoken a lot for the last few weeks about mitigation in terms of pre-season, and I think you probably could have made the case last week that certainly a couple of the goals conceded were, although poor defending, you could probably point towards fitness. That wasn't the case yesterday. It was quality, it was basics, it was discipline, it was poor positional work from not just Giannoulis and Mumba, but certainly crucially in the moments that mattered. So yeah, it feels like they've got plenty of work to do and not much time to do it before obviously next Saturday. So yeah, slightly concerning, I think, given how we were speaking about green shoots last week.
Yeah, well, let's pretty much part the game there then and start looking forward, because I don't think there's a great deal more to be learned from it, from what we've already said, because we know it was basically a mismatch. Norwich, there's all this context behind the disrupted pre-season, a difficult start, but Man City were excellent. And as you've mentioned the stats there, I mean, they had 67% of possession, 11 shots at goal to Norwich's 1, 5 of those were on target. They also had 7 block shots. Norwich had none. 718 passes to Norwich's 349. 46 touches in the opposition box to Norwich's 4. We could go on and on. There are loads of stats. They totally dominated it. They were far too good for Norwich. End of. There's no point us just wallowing that. There's no point in Norwich fans wallowing in it too much. It's done and dusted. And it's a shame that ended up being the first game where it was a proper away day, 1,450 fans, and they made themselves heard in, as usual, a fairly flat atmosphere at the Etihad. Beyond, obviously, they had a lot of goals to celebrate and all the fireworks and stuff at the beginning. That it was good at the start, but the rest of it felt fairly routine for them. The biggest disappointment of the weekend, really, though, Connor, was that you didn't get one of the edible coffee cups, because you were desperate to do a review on the pod, weren't you?
Oh no, I'm gutted, to be honest. That was I was hoping for a silver lining to grab one of those before we left, but yeah, there was no sighting of them. Whether they kept them away from us deliberately or not, I'm not sure. They probably heard that we were going to review it on the pod and got maybe a little bit scared. So yeah, that's their loss, really.
The power of the PinkUn podcast. Okay, well, yeah. So we'll finish part 1 there. I just wanted to mention as well, it is also available in the PinkUn podcast audio feed. I spoke to Kevin Bond earlier in the week, former Norwich player of the season, also played for Manchester City, and his dad, of course, John, managed both clubs. So that was a nice sort of nostalgic look back. There was a bit on the game, but not too much. It was more looking backwards. So if you haven't already had a listen to that, then please do seek that out. Let's move it to part 2. Move it forward. Start building towards Bournemouth and Leicester. How do Norwich hit reset? How do they start putting these two sort of nightmare games behind them? A goal difference of -8 already. The Bournemouth match, I mean, they've had a pretty decent start to the season. Do you think that we will see widespread changes, that all these players, your Jolis, Dowell, those types, are all going to get their opportunity to put down a marker? Or do you suspect that Farke being the way he is, he'll really want to use this as an opportunity to build on what he's already seen and get more minutes into those sort of players, that kind of thing?
I think he'd have to tip towards the former, and that's change it up quite considerably, because if he didn't and just went with those guys again, and then, it was another laboured, listless sort of performance. We all know it's not about cut progress per se, but if they pass up another opportunity at home against a lower level team to get that first win on the board, then there'd be even more criticism and questions, I think, directed at him. So, no, I think it makes far more sense to give those lads you've mentioned, particularly Jolis and Sargent, get them started, get them adapted and acclimatised a little bit to their teammates and playing at Carrow Road. And then what you're hoping then is they grasp the opportunity along with a few others and give him some selection calls for Leicester, because again, mitigation, you played 2 of the best teams in the world, but I don't think there's too many in the current lineup, bearing in mind it was an unchanged 11, who are really sticking their hands up to say, I should be in this team nailed on. So I think there is opportunities now for some of those outfield players. I'm sure Angus Gunn will get the nod instead of Tim Krul. And it's just, for me, about harnessing a bit of go forward momentum really into the Leicester game, and that's ideally going to be a winning progress to the next round, but also a positive performance. You talked about how limited amounts of attacking play they got on Saturday. They need to start putting a few more focus for me on the top end of the pitch, because they look so anemic. The GOAT is isolated. He looks like a man who hasn't had a pre-season. And he needs a bit of help in terms of not only what he needs to do in his own game, but I think that the structure around him and getting some more support up to him. And as we keep saying, it's very difficult to try and get to that level he needs to be when you're playing against some world-class defenders. But for me, it's no wholesale and then try and almost definitively draw a line under what's gone before. If they come out on Tuesday, they play well, they get the win, and the new lads really catch the eye and make some headlines, then the mood starts to shift pretty quickly, I think, and then there would be far more optimism going into Leicester than if if it's more of the same for me. So how do you ensure that is the case from the off? Certainly, you give those lads who you've brought in for a lot of money, all got big reputations. Well, it's time to give them a go. And I'm just trying to think off the top of my head. There's one or two previous Farke seasons where I think he's used these early cup games. Max Aarons springs to mind immediately. That Cardiff away game in the League Cup, who came in, took his chance, never looked back, started the following league game. If my memory serves me, it was probably the Ipswich derby straight after. Albeit we're at Premier League level now, but the same principles apply. There could be lads who play Tuesday night who really put their hand up, and then it's for Daniel to decide if they're ready to maybe have more of a leading role against Leicester. Irrespective, I think he'll make changes anyway for that Leicester game because clearly Rupp, I don't think has shown that he's at this stage got enough about him to speed of thought or deed really for me at Premier League level. So I'd fully expect him to come out for the Leicester game, and there might be one or two other opportunities. Sargent plays hypothetically Tuesday night, plays well, scores a few goals, then there'll be quite a compelling case for him to start ahead of the GOAT, I think, against Leicester. So, there's plenty on this Bournemouth game beyond merely cup progress, I think, because, as I say, given how bruising these first two games have been, there does need to be a fairly swift watershed moment, and then we can look forward with a bit more optimism to the Leicester game, which, is going to be very tough in its own right because Leicester are a very progressive side who've only just missed out on the Champions League in the last 2 years. So, any idea, I think you referenced it yesterday, Dave, any idea that the fixture list suddenly becomes very, very favourable is misguided and probably misunderstands what the Premier League is all about. Every game, really, for various reasons at this level for Norwich, with this current resource that they've got available, is going to be very challenging. So, yeah, I don't think you can underestimate how big a game this Bournemouth one is potentially for a lot of reasons.
Absolutely. As you've mentioned it there, I will just go through the fixtures because just to emphasise how important it is they get a foothold against Leicester before the September international break. When we come back, it's Arsenal away, Watford at home, which has always looked a huge game as soon as the fixtures came out, but even more so now. That is just looking such a crucial, potentially pivotal game in Norwich getting this season going. Then they go to Everton and Burnley. That doesn't sound at all easy, does it? Brighton at home. And then it's the October international break, which is followed by a trip to Chelsea. So that you can't look at the fixture list where Norwich are at the moment and think, oh, yeah, there's points there. Until we see them get a foothold in things and start to look like they're capable of getting to grips with the Premier League standard, it's difficult to start looking ahead. So we really do need them to be hitting reset and almost seeing this as, right, they were the final two pre-season games. Now we're ready. Now we're going to get our plan in place. We're going to kick on from here, but we shall see. Connor, I'll come to you on Brandon Williams in a minute because he's probably the big imponderable in this whole situation in terms of whether he does arrive in time for the game on Tuesday night. But just to look at Bournemouth's start to the season, they beat MK Dons 5-0 in the first round of the League Cup. They drew 2-2 at home with West Brom. Then they got 2 wins, 2-1 at Forest, 2-0 at Birmingham. And then on Saturday, they were held 2-2 to a draw by Blackpool. James Husband scored for Blackpool and is starting for them in the Championship again. So they let a 2-goal lead slip, basically. So they've had a pretty decent start under Parker. And, they were in the playoffs last year. We know it's not that long ago since they won 3-1 at Carrow Road. So there's not much between these two teams at the moment. In no way do I see this game as being an easy League Cup tie. They may make changes, and there's probably going to be interesting elements of that because they signed Orjan Neeland, who didn't play for Norwich, did he? But he's probably going to play his first game for them. They've signed Gary Cahill as well, who Norwich were interested in as a free agent, but he wanted to stay in the south. He didn't play on Saturday, so you'd have thought he's probably going to make his debut. And of course, Philip Billing was a player that Norwich are very keen on this summer. So there's a few interesting strands to this. But yeah, let's kick off with Brandon Williams, Connor. And as we stand, I guess it's a bit difficult to predict whether he's going to come into things. But given what happened with Yanulis and Mumba on Saturday, if they can get that over the line, it would seem a pretty sensible and positive thing to do to get him straight in.
It would. And I think if yesterday served as anything, it was kind of a compelling reason as to why they need to get that deal done probably as soon as possible. But there's probably an element of this that Daniel Farke needs to manage quite carefully because to kind of, and he said he doesn't want to punish him or embarrass him because of the performance yesterday. But I mean, we even spoke last week about there may be sort of red sirens going off for Giannoulis's defensive performance. I had that at Newcastle. I had it again against Liverpool, even though there were probably more positive elements with his work, especially on the ball and progressing the ball up the pitch. Yesterday, it was red sirens. It was someone screaming panic, and it was kind of every warning signal ever going off. It was pretty. It wasn't great, and it's not just a him issue, as we've spoken about. It was a wider issue as well, but that one was clearly highlighted more by the fact that he was subbed off after 45 minutes. So there will be times this season when Norwich probably will need him against teams that aren't as good as Manchester City, and that's probably every other team in the league, to be frank. So yeah, I just think he's got to manage it carefully, because you risk by putting him straight in, which I think he probably will do, providing they can get that over the line. You've also got to manage the Giannoulis situation to make sure that you've got a player there who is still willing to push the two options, whoever they are in fullback areas. So it's going to be a really interesting one. But equally, he can't hand out gifts. And if Brandon Williams comes in and showcases in training that he's a better option defensively and he strengthens the team, then he has to play. And it's as simple as that. And that's why he gets paid a healthy amount of money to make those decisions. But there's going to be an element of man management, as is the case with Mumba probably on the other side as well, about this situation. But I would be shocked if we got to. Well, A, if we got to Tuesday and Brandon Williams wasn't in the building, but B, if we got to Saturday and he wasn't in the starting lineup. So I think he probably will stick with Giannoulis on Tuesday, just to maybe give him a little bit of a confidence booster. But on Saturday, I would fully expect Brandon Williams to come in, to be honest. Although it wouldn't shock me if Williams was in the door soon enough to play on Tuesday if he played. So it's probably a wait and see on the Williams timeline. But yeah, I think it's a situation he has to manage really carefully, to be honest.
Okay, Connor, have a think about the team that you would play. Maybe jot it down if you want. I've got my one, which I'll come back to in a minute. But Pad, just while we're on Brandon Williams, and it looks like that is close and maybe even gets done on Monday. What do you make of that as a signing? Because we saw him at Old Trafford in that 4-0 defeat for Norwich, didn't we? And likewise, we're just over a week left of the transfer window. We've seen the name of Matthias Norman emerge, but we're still not really seen Cahill is pertinent in that conversation. We've still not really seen another defender being linked, have we? So sort of the transfer latest, there's still a lot that Norwich fans are waiting for that extra bit of information, isn't there?
Yeah. Take our lead from what Daniel said on Friday, that it's been a good window, but those areas he mapped out and said they need to fill those holes between now and August the 31st, so not that long now, just under 9 days or so, to make it, I think, a great window or an exceptional window, which is open to interpretation at the minute on the evidence of the first two games. But clearly they have identified Williams. That will tick the left-sided box, and on him. But my own thoughts are very surprised given his breakthrough. I mean, he was excellent a couple of seasons ago. I think he played in the region of about 30, 35 games for Solskjaer, and you thought this kid has got all the attributes you need. He was fearless, which is pertinent, talking about a little bit of the rabbit in the headlights that was exhibited by certain players at the Etihad. He looked like he was born for those surroundings. You pull on a Manchester United shirt, you've got to have the personality and the temperament to handle that and all that goes with that. And there was no sense there was a very young lad plucked from the academy making his way. So what surprises me is subsequently that he's sort of deferred a little bit. Luke Shaw's obviously had clearly a renaissance for club and country, but Tellez as well seems to be ahead of him in the pecking order. And just not having observed what's happened in the intervening period that closely, I'm not sure why that would be the case, given he looked very, very, very precociously talented 2 seasons ago. So if Norwich are getting that player, because obviously you're not playing for Man United unless you've got the ability, but it's his temperament, and that might be something that Norwich, in terms of Webber and Parker, are looking at. That they need that personality. They need big characters in the changing room as much as on the pitch. And albeit he's a young man, but as I say, if you can hold your own with some of the characters in that United dressing room, then you've got something about you. You watch his game, the way he plays, he's a combative type. He doesn't ask a quarter or give a quarter. he's tigerish in his defending, and I think he has attributes which Norwich at this moment in time appear to lack. So I think that's a very astute piece of business. And it just remains to be seen whether they now view him as the first choice left back, or whether there's a fight to unfold with him and Yanulis and Mumba, and also as well as versatility. Yes, he's come through at United as a left-sided player, but he can operate on the right. And there might be scenarios where Max, for whatever reason during the course of the season, is unavailable. It's good given the Sam Barham situation to have that flexibility. So for me, it's a no-brainer. I don't see anybody disputing the merit of that deal, which will be done in the next 24 hours or so. And then the other lad you mentioned, Norman is a player that clearly they've monitored for a period of time, and whether what they saw again on Saturday is added to the urgency that they need to do something in that area of the pitch. Personally, for me, of the 3 remaining positions, that is the key position, I think, ultimately. Because it unlocks, for me, the potential of Gilmour. Gilmour in this side, the way it's set up now, you're not going to extract the maximum from him. And what we saw, albeit in small samples for Chelsea and then Scotland at the Euros, he needs... Who's he had whenever he's dropped into a Chelsea midfield? He's had Kante and Jorginho alongside him. Well, with the greatest respect, I'm not asking for a Kante or Jorginho, but they do need somebody of that ilk around him to almost do the hard yards and allow him to get on the ball and dictate and set the tempo. That's where he will add an extra dimension to this Norwich team. It's not chasing his tail, trying to close down players, trying to get the right side of Sadio Mane 2 weeks ago, being put on the carousel with Lise Malou and Rupp yesterday and shuffling from side to side, trying and failing to close the gaps in front of that back four. So it isn't just simply bringing in a Ollie Skip and Alex Tete in his prime. It's what that could do for Gilmour for me. So that's the key. And it remains to be seen if Norman is the player. If it's not him, it'll have to be somebody else, because right now that is a glaring deficiency in this Norwich 11. And if they don't address it, you would seriously fear for them, and in terms of them making a competitive tilt at staying in the division. Central defence, just to finish there, Kale was one they looked at. I think that's indicative of they're still not going to be looking to make a splash and pull a £10 million player out. I think that ship has sailed now since Ayer, obviously, or Celtic more pertinently, spurned their advances earlier in the summer. I think they would look now to free agents, loans, albeit, if William comes in, that rules out the domestic loan route, but they could still do something overseas loan-wise. And I think that's probably where they'd look to go, more of one who could come in and supplement rather than we're going to spend whatever remaining budget we've got on an out, because I don't think those players are available. I think now the season's underway. You look around domestically, there's a reason why they were looking at Gary Cahill, because probably, those other type of players aren't available to them. The ones who could come. Joe Worrell's mentioned, obviously, but, it looks like there's other clubs looking at him. Southampton, I see Hassan Houghton saying after, or going into, they're playing later today against Manchester United, I think he's saying they will definitely do a centre-back, and they've been linked with Worrell. So I think we'd be in a situation again where if Norwich are targeting those type of players, they're going to find there's probably Premier League competition that's going to be a little bit too hot in terms of the financials. So, I think I'll be surprised if the centre-back isn't sourced maybe from abroad and maybe in a sort of loan, shorter-term option. But there's no doubt about it. Everything Daniel said on Friday in terms of what they need to do still was only reinforced and underlined by what we didn't see as much as what we did see against Manchester City. So, it's going to be focus on the pitch in the remaining 8 or 9 days of the window with 2 or 3 games to play in that period. But I think increasingly it's going to be now, can Stuart Webber and the recruitment team he's still got around him do what they need to do to, plug some glaring holes, certainly in that defensive midfield area. And on the evidence of yesterday, possibly at left back as well.
Yeah, they have until 11 p.m, Tuesday, August 31st. So we are very much moving into the end game on that front now. And it's interesting, another young lad coming in, though. You think about the average age has probably lowered quite a bit, hasn't it? If Tete, Vrancic, Stiepermann have all moved on, Hugo Hernandez don't really seem like they're part of the plans. And they've brought in Scholes, Sargent, Rashica, I suppose, is mid-20s, but now they're bringing in Williams. It was I thought quite telling. Grant Hanley said 2 or 3 times in his post-match interview, we need men. We need men. We need to show our steel. That kind of sort of tub-thumping, typical sort of thing that you hear from an experienced pro when you're in this after a 5-0 defeat. So it will be interesting to see if Williams brings a bit of an elite mentality, almost like you say. If you're playing for Manchester United, that is a very different style to playing for Norwich City. Connor, this will be interesting to see whether we've both come up with the same team. So I'm saying for the Bournemouth game to go back to a 4-2-3-1, Gunn or playing goal. I think we're all pretty much in expectation of that. I've gone Mumba, Omobamidele, Gibson, and then for the moment I've said Brandon Williams at left back. We shall see whether that is possible and over the line. I think Gibson will want another 90 minutes, after a disrupted pre-season, whereas with Hanley, you just got to treat him a little bit with kid gloves, haven't you? Because he's fresh back from an injury and didn't have a full pre-season. I think he's probably at the point where he's going to benefit as much from his time on the training ground. And then I'd keep Lys Malou in, but play McLean because he needs to start as the 2 holders. I'd let Gilmour have a little breather on the bench. And then I'd play Sargent on the right, Dowell as the 10, Scholes on the left, and Adam Eder up top, and then have a pretty strong bench, not necessarily bringing in kids and stuff. I think this is very much a game. Well, Lys Malou said in his interview that he really wants that first win to start the season. So, where have you gone with it?
I'm just trying to count up. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. I mean, we've got probably 9 similar players. Maybe 8 actually. I'm not very good at maths or counting. So I mean, the changes that I've made, really, I agree with you on the centre backs. I think it will be probably Gibson. I think we'll probably see Zimmerman, to be honest, maybe over Omobamidele, simply because he did play on the left, didn't he? So it wouldn't surprise me Zimbo, someone sort of plays on the right. So I could see that working out. But other than that, a similar back 4. I think we might get a look at Jacob Sorensen as well, because there's, as we debated last week, there's still where does he fit into the midfield mix? And maybe Daniel's asking himself the same question. So this could be a good opportunity for him alongside Kenny McLean. I'd probably go with Rashica again, simply because I think against Liverpool we saw him run out of steam. I don't think we saw too much from him against Manchester City, given all the COVID stuff. I think he probably want a few more minutes with Dowell and Scholes as well. And then I've gone for sort of Sargent as the man up front. But as you've kind of mapped it out there, I could see it being Sargent on one wing and then Adam Eder up front. So I could quite plausibly see that situation. But yeah, so to run through my team in full: Gunn, Mumba, Gibson, Zimmerman, Williams, Sorensen, McLean, Rashica, Dowell, Scholes, Sargent is what I've gone for. So a lot of similarities, I think, between us both. But yeah, I think kind of what Pad said earlier about Farke heading in the direction of sort of wide scale change. I think we'll see that, and I think we'll see a change in approach and change in shape as well, because as we've kind of said, again, not to dwell on Manchester City too much, but you just want them to see or have a bit more of a goal threat to kind of ease those concerns, and maybe a bit more of a balanced approach, a little bit between those that sort of defensive phases and attacking phases as well. So that kind of does that, and also allows us to have a look at those players who maybe haven't been given too many opportunities yet. Kieran Dowell, for example, if he does get an opportunity, then that's a massive kind of chance for him to prove not just why he should be included, but why Daniel Farke should change the shape for him to be included. So, I think there's a lot of opportunities in there. Scholes as well is someone that I think there's a lot of excitement to watch and to see what he can bring. If we're going to talk about Sargent as a centre forward, then I just think we need to see him up there on his own and what he can offer, because there are a couple of bright moments in what was a pretty poor performance, as we kind of said yesterday. He did look to inject some sort of forward thrust that maybe they didn't have, a bit of presence as well. So as Pat said earlier, if he can get a goal or two on Tuesday, then that will just sort of make his claim to start on Saturday stronger. So yeah, that's the 11 I would go with, I think.
You might have persuaded me on Rashica when you're talking there, to be honest. Sargent up front and keep Rashica in, just to keep a bit more continuity. So you'd still have Rashica, Gibson and Lys Malou in there. And I think Mumba and Yanulis will be interesting. If Williams isn't available and one of them's got to play on the left, then obviously it's fine for Max to play. Max will play all day long, won't he? Probably play every day of the week if you let him. But it's probably going to be a bit of a psychological assessment of where Eunice is at after being hooked at half time, whether Mumba is in the right headspace after, for sort of 15 minutes, he looked really bright, didn't he? And he looked like he was doing everything that Eunice hadn't done. There was a few good sort of forward movements and stuff. And then it conceded basically the two goals in similarly sort of culpable ways to Eunice. But yeah, Rashica did have the one shot, didn't he? Probably should have passed to Sargent, but because Sargent had won the ball as well. But I just think it's going to be a really interesting game because this is a helpful one, hopefully, for Daniel to build. If he's thinking, for instance, of playing three at the back against Leicester, and he's thinking of making a proper change in formation, then tomorrow night is Tuesday night, is the time to do it, isn't it? Is the time when you can really bed that in and start making those plans against, as I say, it's not going to be an easy game against Bournemouth, even if they do make some changes. So I just think it's really, really interesting to see what happens on Tuesday night. Just to finish off the show, then we've got just a few bits of news I wanted to get through. I'm sure you were all across this one, Pad, being a big fan of celebrity Hollywood news. But two of the most famous men in the world pretty much were talking about Norwich City last week, weren't they? Hugh Jackman, Ryan Reynolds, big movie stars. We all know Hugh Jackman is sort of a kind of a Norwich fan because his mum lived in Norwich or something like that when he was a kid, and he used to come over from Australia and things like that. Ryan Reynolds, of course, has bought Wrexham, and Hugh Jackman, they've got this weird sort of, it's like a fake beef. It's like how it's described. They've sort of got this fake rivalry, which they both keep stoking up all the time. And Ryan Reynolds just joked that he might buy Norwich. So you'd be well up for that, Pad, wouldn't you? I'm sure you're a big fan of X-Men.
No, Dave. Sorry, you've come to the wrong man. If you want any insight, I mean, I sit
Hospital
back.
Pass.
Yeah, the big star. You and Tony jabber on about various films, documentaries, whatever you watch. So I'll push that back in your direction. I've heard of the names. I don't think I've probably watched too much with those guys, if I'm honest. If it's not got a football in, I don't really want to watch it, Dave, the truth be told. So, no, when you started on this front, I thought this was going to be a serious question about ownership, but obviously not. So let's park it there, mate, and move on.
Yeah, let's move on. But it's always nice to see Norwich making some sort of high-profile headlines. And a couple of youngsters wanted to talk about as well, Connor. Rob Nizzet has gone out to Lecce, hasn't he? So he's sort of one that they, I guess, have admitted defeat with. He's not going to be the player to come in for them. What did you make of that one?
Probably not surprising. I think we've spoken a few times on here that there's some hopes for a few of the left backs in younger groups. Last name Shipley. I want to say his first name's Lewis, but I might have plucked that from thin air. Is good. Being one, they've got Sean Stewart as well, who's a Northern Ireland youth international. So I mean, they've probably got players that maybe they have higher hopes for that are younger, and as soon as that happens, probably the best example to consider this with is Akinfenmewo. So as soon as Omobamidele steps up and kind of shows what he does on the first team level, then that kind of makes him redundant to a point. So it's the harsh nature of academy football, isn't it? And I'm sure Rob Nizzet will have a very good career elsewhere, because we saw him in a couple of the pre-season games, and I've seen him perform a few times, and there's certainly a lot of potential there to mould. It just maybe hasn't quite fell right for him at Norwich with different sort of situations and scenarios, and probably parts of his development as well that maybe he needs to go off and do elsewhere. So not the most surprising, but there's clearly a talent there, and it's going to be interesting to see kind of where he goes and how his career sort of develops from here, I think.
And a couple of loans, Pad, as well. No, two more for Neil Adams to keep an eye on. Dan Adhead's gone out to Gillingham. He actually played yesterday as they won. I think they beat Morecambe 2-1. So League One move for him. And Tyrese Omotoye has gone to League Two this time to Leyton Orient. So again, it's a narrative which we're getting used to every season. There's a lot of loan players to keep an eye on. But those two both seem like they've got something about them. But as ever with these loans, you really need to make a big impression, don't you?
Absolutely, yeah. And the one two that spring to mind, and one's now very much in the first team, and one was and has moved on for big money, and that's Ben Godfrey and Todd Cantwell. They benefited hugely from the right loans at the right times in their career, and that's all you're trying to do with those two you mentioned. But the whole stable of lads who've now gone out of the building, and it is an art form, and increasingly so. And it's not just about, if we're honest, developing players that are good enough for Norwich's first team. It's there's a bit of an economical aspect to this as well. You look at Soto, for example. There's a guy who, if all the planets align, will move on permanently to Portugal. He's obviously got a Porto's B team initially, but there is a permanent deal in place. Same with Famewo and Charlton, and guys who, certainly in Soto's case, never got near the Norwich first team, and even Famewo, a couple of times he was in and around the first team picture there. But ultimately, Norwich will make profit on those type of players if those type of deals go through. And it is, as I say, a very, very important strand of what Norwich are trying to do now as a club. And that's why, you hope the current crop that go out, maybe we're talking about one or two of them in 12, 18 months' time, as we have done the Cantwell and Ben Godfrey, James Maddison as well, sort of progression. Adhead's an interesting one. He's gone into a decent level of football there, League One. So if he plays great, and of course that's where they plucked him from originally at Bury, and it's almost like maybe you look at it from the outside and think he's been treading water in intervening period because he was playing at League One level. But if he went there and played a lot of minutes and really showed what he was all about, and from what you were saying yesterday, Dave, they tried him in more of a holding midfield, defensive midfield role. Well, as we've spoken liberally on this pod, that is an area of Norwich's squad at first team level that they are desperate to find players to fit that increasingly key position in the modern game. And if you can develop one of your own or one who you've plucked from, was it Rochdale he was at originally?
Rochdale,
wasn't it? Bury, didn't I? Yeah, Rochdale. And can fashion a player to fill that hole, then that could be a very astute piece of business, putting him out on loan to Gillingham. So yeah, watch with interest to guess all those guys. But and final thing I'd say is they need to be grasping these opportunities. I mean, Omotoy went and had a little taste of it at Swindon last season, albeit a team who were fighting relegation. He didn't really play a huge amount, didn't score, I don't believe, and that probably wasn't the right loan for him when he came back to Norwich. So how many more opportunities these lads get at these clubs remains to be seen. But as we've talked just there about Rob Nizzet, the scene or the scenery moves on very swiftly behind these players, and if they don't make the most of these opportunities, they might find that they're entering a bit of a cul-de-sac when they get back to Norwich. And ultimately, if they haven't shown enough in these loan spells away, then they're not really furthering their prospects of getting into Norwich's first team.
Great stuff. And just finally, I did want to mention as well that David Wright has left as the under-23s head coach. He's got a first team role at MK Dons. Of course, Russell Martin recently moved on to Swansea. And is it Liam Manning? Is that the right name, Connor? Yeah, for he's the guy who's gone in as head coach at MK Dons. He's actually from Norwich apparently, and was involved with the Ipswich and West Ham academies for a long time. And he's brought in David Wright as his assistant first team coach. So he was at Norwich for, I think it was over 5 years in the end. Initially under 18s, it was the Youth Cup quarter final in 2018 when Max Aarons and Adam Eder were part of that squad, and interviewed him a lot of times. Always seemed a really nice guy, and it always seemed like the players respected him because he'd had a proper EFL career, played a lot of games for Crewe, Ipswich, had that brief spell at Norwich, Palace. He had a proper career, didn't he? So similar move to Matt Gill in terms of stepping up from the under-23s to a first team role, but not crossing the border, thankfully, to Ipswich. Although he did play over 100 games for them, so who knows? He may end up there one day. But we shall see what that means for Norwich. Alan Nielsen was his assistant; he takes charge, but also head of football development. Steve Weaver is going to be alongside him, as he is with Greg Crane for the under-18s, who had a bit of a nightmare on Saturday. They lost 10-0 at Aston Villa, but we won't go into that one. That will do for this week's pod. Thank you very much for listening, whether you are listening on the audio feed or watching on the PinkUn YouTube channel. Thank you very much for watching. Please do remember to subscribe. And if you ever get the time to leave us a review or a rating, that's always very much appreciated. We'll have all the build up to the Bournemouth game, of course, and then we'll be at Carrow Road on Tuesday night to bring you all the usual stuff. The live blog, reaction, analysis will be across it all. So we will catch up with you again on Tuesday night.